Welcome, friends, to our Monday morning or Monday evening uh, discussion ongoing. And today I'm going to uh, touch on a number of different subjects, but I want to begin by recapitulating and fulfilling my promise that I made at the last class. So you remember we were talking about at that time the concept or the virtue of compassion. And I had made reference to certain psychological studies, sociological studies that had been done on this, on the nature of compassion. And uh, I referenced them, and I was asked in the question and answer session afterwards if I could give the source. And so I have, and I asked Stavara to put them in the chat box up there, and I see he hasn't done it yet. And there they come. I have listed two articles. The first one is The Morality of Meditation by David DiSteno. Now that is where that study I mentioned about where the person comes into the waiting room on crutches, if you remember. That's where that study is listed. But there's also a second article that I want to reference, and here it's basically, are we morally obligated to meditate? Now, that's a bit of a strange title, but it's a very good article, I thought, because basically it's also going into basically the effect of meditation on morality, and in and it gives a lot of interesting points, and perhaps even some of the things I mentioned. Maybe these, I read that article and I began to think about certain elements that are of interest to me, and I hope will maybe be of interest to some of you as well. And what I want to start, I'm going to eventually get to talking about, as I may have mentioned in some of the when the first title of this discussion, I said to Bar, "Oh, let's talk about." I'm going to follow up thoughts on the topic of generosity, or I can't remember exactly what the topic title I suggested, but it was on that topic. And now I know we have talked about this virtue, generosity, before, and not so long ago, actually. It's maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months, somewhere in there. We have talked about it, but it popped into my mind again as I was thinking of this larger theme, and that I want to preface what I want to say today, and this is the subject of ethics. Now, ethics is basically defined, you might say, by principles of how we conduct our life. And I think all of us, we have some, we may not think of them consciously in making a list, but we have some basic principles that we think this is right, this is wrong, and I'm going to live my way in such and such a way. And virtues come into there. I'm going to, you could say ethics is the expression in daily life of virtue, in virtuous behavior, ethical behavior. And so, but it's been a topic that philosophers have discussed for millennia. I in thinking about this topic, I even looked up a few of the you might say go back to the Greco-Roman tradition. There were very famous ethicists in those days and continuing. And this was a very important thing to them in Greco-Roman culture of how to behave. And it's something that we're always referencing to some degree. How do we determine that? And as people who are trying to perfect ourselves on the spiritual life, this question comes up too, and this relationship between spirituality and ethical behavior, moral conduct. The two are interrelated, and I've always found this quite fascinating. And I know when Master came to, or he came to the West, and he began to promulgate his mission, he was talking, he came to talk about spirituality. And I know that was when I first came to these teachings, I was interested. Oh, this is a yogi, and he had these yogic techniques, and I was interested in that. But then I began to notice very quickly that he said he came not to just talk about spirituality and God, but how to apply God into our daily life. And I think this age that we live in right now, this is important. We have to learn to make, and this is what Master emphasized, we have to make religion practical. And religion is of no use, he said, actually, very strongly. It's of no use if it does not help us live our lives in a better way. Religion has to be practical, or we delve into the world of philosophy. And I know there are people that this relationship between religion, spirituality, and ethics, conduct, there seems to sometimes be a disconnect. You saw somebody espouses great spiritual principles, but it doesn't reflect in any way in their daily life. You look at their life and they say, what about these principles? Isn't you need to put this into action in some way? And conversely, we have to see that sometimes, and I was, going back, and was reading some philosophy on this subject of, you see that people had a very strong opinions about morality and ethics and conduct, but they seemed to lack a heart, and they seemed to lack a spirit. It was like a wonderful framework of how we should behave in life and the rules, but the inspiration behind them was not understood. And we have to realize that as one progresses on the spiritual path, it naturally will begin to affect our behavior. If it does not affect our behavior in some positive way that's demonstrable to other people, you see, we may think we're doing great. We're flying, and we think, oh, but if everybody can't see anything reflected in our face or our eyes or our behavior, you have to be a little bit suspicious about whether you're making that spiritual progress that you started out and you were hoping for. So spirituality of the heart, and we pick it up by that string, loving God first, and then expressing that somehow in our behavior that is demonstrable to ourselves and to others as well. It's a natural thing. And now there's people will say, well, and I have read that people say, well, it's ethics it takes work to change one's behavior. And that's true. I think we all know that. It does take work. But interestingly, it's like if you work on the ethical behavior, it's helpful. But if you change yourself spiritually in the true sense of loving God, connecting with God, your behavior will naturally conform ethically to the proper conduct. Because and spirituality and ethical behavior in a spiritual sense is situational. You can't have one rule for all situations. It's directional. You find that it has to be expressed like sometimes Master would express stern anger at some disciple because he was disciplining them. But he wasn't really angry from the heart, but he may have sounded angry at the moment. But he said, no, I wasn't angry. That was going to take that tone of voice to change that person. So you see, you can't judge that strictly from what you see outside. But nevertheless, generally speaking, we can use conduct, ethical behavior, as a way to spiritually change ourselves. Now, I was thinking about this morning before this class. A couple hours before I get up ahead of time, and I was meditating. I was doing my Kriya, and my mind was not on the Kriya. Honestly, I was thinking about this class, but I did my Kriyas. And I thought, well, sometimes you do your spiritual practices and you don't perhaps get under the surface onto that deeper level, but yet we do it anyway. And this is this is what the gurus tell us. We do our kriyas, and underneath, even though we may not think something is happening, underneath we are making changes in our life. And kriya changes us, even though we're not maybe as attentive to that kriya. But he says, do it anyway. Do your kriyas, do your spiritual practices, and you will change. And the gurus will come in there somehow and make this happen. And so the same thing goes true with ethics and virtues and moral behavior. We do them, even though maybe we don't have the spirit quite perfected yet, but in the doing, they change us. And it's sort of like a spiritual practice in that way. And you do the spiritual practice, and somehow you don't know why, but if you do it enough, you begin to get in tune with the spirit behind it, and then the spirit begins to manifest too. And so this brings us, of course, now to the topic I wanted to address in this regard, which was gratitude. And now we know we've talked about gratitude before, but I want to approach it from a slightly different perspective here, a little bit from a scientific point of view. I was reading those studies last time about compassion, and somehow once I got reading, I started looking at, following up and looking at other studies about other qualities. And one of the things that seemed to pop out is this idea that some researchers have used this phrase that some virtues tend to be parents of other virtues. In other words, if you perfect one, other elements, other things in one's life begin to change, more so than other virtues. Now, so happens, I think you could say what we talked about last week, compassion as being one of those. It's a parent virtue, and it affects us by practicing that one. Many things begin to change in a positive way in our life. But another one that is mentioned in this very same regard is this virtue or behavior of gratitude. And as I was researching this, I came on the writings of a Roman philosopher, ethicist from before the time of Christ, actually. He lived about 100 years prior, half a century to a century prior. His name was Cicero. And Cicero wrote about gratitude. He says, gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but it is the parent of all others. Now, I suspect that was a bit of overstatement to say it's the parent of all other virtues, but he was placing great importance on it, and he wrote quite a bit about it. And he and many others over the centuries have written about gratitude. It's important because it maintains it's not just its effect on the individual. Now it does, and I'm going to list some of these things of what it does for us as an individual. But these philosophers, Cicero in particular, was not just for that, how it affected us personally and elevated us personally, but they were interested in what behavior is helpful and important for society as a whole, the smooth running society. So these parent virtues are, you might say, ones that if commonly inculcated into the culture, make that culture successful and make it run smoothly. Now, of course, on the highest sense, these virtues ought to be there because they're derived from spiritual behavior that is being expressed outwardly in that way. And I think maybe the Romans lack that a little bit and you see that sometimes. Ethics in and of themselves are important, but without that spiritual element, as I said, this can become hollow. But nevertheless, they felt, and Cicero certainly did, that healthy this gratitude is the foundation of a well-run a society that works well. And it's because basically what it does is with gratitude, we transcend the idea that we're just living this life for ourselves. It creates interconnections and that attitude within society that allows us to be able to transcend some of the difficulties that we find of people being isolated. And it's a mutual, and showing mutual appreciation permeates and sets the ground for other things to do. But it does have, and I should mention these, that there are significant effects of gratitude that have been studied, that quite a lot of research has been done on it. And it's been linked to a number of things. One, it's been linked to an ability to be self-controlled. It's been be patience. It's impulse control. You might say the gratitude somehow it correlates with an ability to resist temptation. Something. So we teach our kids, be grateful. Express gratitude, and we're also teach them on the other hand to resist temptation, to do the opposite. And so rather than focusing on resisting temptation, it might be a good idea to emphasize gratitude. And you find what happens is by emphasizing the positive side, some of these negative things in character building, inability to control oneself, resistance to temptation, impatience, these sort of things, they begin to moderate simply by the positive expression of some of these virtues, which is in this case gratitude. Now, I'd like to reference, but let me reference some of these positive things that go with gratitude. Then I'll get to this case study that was done. Well, it correlates. Obviously, if you have these positive virtues, it correlates with happiness. It correlates with a reduction of stress. It's said to be one of the highest predictors of positive mental health. Yeah, people suffer from depression. Unfortunately, I don't want to say it's if you're suffering from depression, you're ungrateful, but the practice, you see, not the practice of gratitude is a counteracting force against difficult mental states. And so sometimes, and I've noticed this, sometimes have counseled many people over the years and depressed people in depression and a lot of things going wrong in their life. The practice of positive gratitude in some way has an effect on them. If maybe it's because it takes the mind off of one's own problems. I don't know, but it is an interesting story that I have told before, but I'll repeat it here because I found it very curious and interesting. About this was many, many years ago, 40 plus years ago. I knew a young woman who suffered from she was actually quite beautiful, but except she had warts on her. She kept getting these disfigurations on her hands. And it was, so it kind of made her self-conscious. And she tried all sorts of things, went to doctors and creams and this and that. Nothing seemed to help her. And so she finally went to, I guess you would call this person a psychic healer. I don't know. But anyway, she went to this person, and this healer said something very curious. He said, well, it's a karmic situation, and what you need to do is go to the local park and buy some breadcrumbs and some things and feed the birds. And just there, then feed the birds. Take a time out of your daily life and go and feed the birds in the park. Now that was a very strange thing. I just thought that was, what going on with that? But she did, and by golly, her hands did clear up. Now, why? I don't know. But sometimes you just do things and they have some other effect. What did that have an effect on her? I don't know. It could have been just a placebo effect. She thought it was going to work and it did work. I don't know. But it does correlate with a lot of things. Mental health, for one, and I mentioned it correlates with stronger interpersonal relationships, with friendships. Obviously, friendship has to be built on appreciation, mutual appreciation, expression of that in gratitude. Uh, Being helpful, it helps us see the world as a friendlier place. If people that have a grateful disposition, they tend to think of the world as more friendly, more hospitable. Now, here we come into the question, what comes first? Am I grateful and then I see the world hospitably, or the world is hospitable, then I'm grateful for it? Well, it's a virtuous cycle, as is many virtues in life. These ethics is we don't know which comes first. Some people say, well, I'm going to be angry because the world treats me bad. So I'm angry. Well, maybe the world treats you bad because you're angry. You see, so if you have to, which is going to easier to change, the world or yourself? Well, start with yourself, and you'll see that sometimes the world begins to change you a little bit different. Well, uh, and also, actually, before I forget, it correlates with a healthier immune system. Why? I don't know. I don't know. That's the interesting thing, why these things should be. But obviously, it's our view, our disposition toward life. It releases stress, for one thing. Because an ungrateful person tends to be emotionally tense, whereas a grateful person tends to be more relaxed, and their energy is going out to thinking of others rather than in to, oh, ungrateful, why am I the way I am and the world is them? So there's a great release of tension. And I think that alone allows the immune system to perform its functions in a better way. But I want to, one more point in these things is there is a correlation, and this one I found fascinating, between gratitude and resisting the impulse to cheat. Now, this was one that in terms when we're talking about ethical behavior, something that needs to be taken to heart, because we are in an age where cheating, corruption, is somewhat endemic in some places, and certainly everywhere there's that element. And so we have to, what are we going to do about that? How do we counter that? And it's been shown, a number of studies, that when people take on a grateful attitude, they tend to cheat less. Now, which comes first? And again, but this is the reason that came to my mind, uh, and why this happens is one thing, is people think life is more fair, perhaps. Maybe they're feeling circumstances are such that they have to cheat. There's a lack of connectedness to the people that we're cheating to, and maybe gratitude creates us. We don't feel so much of an impulse to cheat when we feel close to somebody. We're not alone in this world. Well, the thing that this study had done is they had set up one of these studies had set up a situation where it's quite complicated, too complicated to explain here, but they set up a situation where a person could cheat. And so that what they did is they induced a state of gratitude by circumstances they set up. They induced a state of gratitude in people in one group. They induced the circumstances of happiness in a second group. And in the third group, they didn't induce any. It was just neutral. And then they put them in a situation where they could cheat on something. And, they had some hundreds of people doing these things, and they replicated it. And interestingly, they found that inducing a sense of gratitude significantly declined the tendency for the person to go forward and cheat. And they found much more so than people that are neutral, and interestingly, much more than people who were induced in a state of happiness. So happiness and not cheating do not correlate. Happiness and or neutrality, you could say that's the baseline. Pretty much the happy people were pretty much just like the baseline people, but the people that felt gratitude significantly were less cheating. Now, the interesting thing about this is this was applied, it was being applied in management studies. And so consequently, in management, large businesses, nobody in large business, they don't want their employees to cheat or take, shortcuts that are improper. And so typically what companies do is they emphasize you have to be honest, then there's penalties for being dishonest. So they say, honesty is the best policy. It's a good thing to say. And if you're not, you're going to be, so there's this maybe reward and punishment approach. But they found that that's not nearly as effective, that instead, if companies can make their employees grateful, feeling a sense of gratitude, they're much less likely to cut corners and be dishonest. Now, it's interesting, and so this is yes, this is a commercial way of looking at things, but what might a company do to make somebody feel grateful? Why does anybody feel grateful? Well, I felt that I've been served in some way, in a good way. So my company has treated me fairly. I'm grateful for that. My company has been helpful to me. I'm grateful for that. They've helped when things have gone wrong, the company's been there for me. I'm grateful for that. Company is sacrificed. That manager is sacrificed for me. I'm grateful. I have and you could say, if you look at it commercially, I'm indebted to him. I have some reciprocity to pay back, and other people's behavior, if they've helped me in that way, it induces a sense of me wanting to help them. So reciprocity, and this point was something basically, it was what Cicero and the ethicists from the ancient times were speaking to. They say a society needs to be built on, and why he was saying that, on gratitude, because to some degree that we feel a sense of interconnectedness with, and we feel that other people are helping me. I have a sense of moral obligation, and I want to help. It's not just I have to help, with grudgingly. It induces a sense of inwardly wanting to help. And so, if some of you are in a management situation in that sort of a world, it's a tool. And think about it. And if we behave in our life in such a way, in that way, we naturally build a foundation below in which we can then build upon. And so now the question, of course, is, and this is how do you develop sense of gratitude? Well, something that, of course, as parents raising kids, we should be on the lookout for them is, getting them to, you can't just pound it into them, but I wish I had good answers for this. It's not so easy, but in my thinking about it and remembering and studying about this one, there are little exercises we can do that have actually been tested. And I think in workshops and, and previously I've used these little techniques in a workshop. And one is to write a letter, express gratitude to somebody else. Of course, if you get in the habit of expressing gratitude, that, and with meaning, with feeling, that actually is a good habit to develop. And that is one thing you do. But sometimes just writing a note of gratitude to somebody else who has helped you. And if just expressing, say, somebody who's helped you in your life in some way, and on the appropriate occasion, say, that I really want to, it's your birthday or it's some holiday, or even, I don't know, you can make up a day. I really want to express you've really had an impact on my life in such and such a way. And, and I want to say thank you. It's helped me in my life. They have found that just that writing of that letter increases uh, all of those benefits we were talking about gratitude. It helps. It helps. Now it doesn't last, forever. If you just do it once, it wears off after I think it's a week or two or three. And but if you do that, sort of inculcate a habit like that, well, then you find these gratitude markers, correlations begin to develop. And another one is that every day make a list. Write three things at breakfast. Uh, Three good things about your life. Now you don't. I maybe doing it every day. You might run out of things to say. Do it once a week. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Every Monday, let's say, write a list of three good things about your life. Yeah, that's good. That's great. Or you could do it, three good things about your wife or husband that you really appreciate. And just, well, that's nice. Now, it might be nice to say those things too, but if even just the writing of it, especially if you're doing it for yourself, so you make that affirmation. This is related to a third thing, which is keeping a spiritual journal. And now some people might keep a spiritual journal to complain. Uh, uh, what's happened today? How are you going? Oh, it's terrible. And that's the master asking Swami Kriyananda. His name was Walter. He says, how's it going today, Walter? And Swami said, well, and Matt said, that's good. He didn't let him go any further. And so you don't use your journal, to do that. Although some people say, it gets it out of your system, but I think it's more of an affirmation, so be careful. But you certainly can use a journal to express grateful feelings, the context. But in these ways, you could say, you remember, gratitude is something that's a natural result of spiritual growth. Obviously, we meditate, we practice these other things of compassion, we release our attachments, we feel God is with us in all of these things. And you find that gratitude naturally begins to know. But in my reading of Cicero, or I got reading a little bit about his life, I found it fascinating. I'll share at the end maybe some quotes from his life, a little off topic, but they were good quotes. And he says, there's 5 signs of someone that lacks gratitude. And these can be expanded upon each one of these. Person who fails to show appreciation for a kindness that's been received. In other words, and the reason is, he says, is not to feel ourselves as being above showing reciprocal kindness. Because some people, they say if somebody thanks them for something, well, it's maybe there's a status issue. I'm above it. I'm too elevated to express my kindness back or express gratitude back. And so he says that's one of the marks, a failure to show appreciation for kindnesses that have been done to you. Don't make that happen. And then he took it further because remember, I was saying in those days, ethicists, and even today, it's not just what you feel, it's what you do and the effect that has on society. And so the second one, he says, you take one's country for granted. Now you could say that's patriotism, but he didn't really mean it in that way. What he says, to take one's society for granted, to take one's village for granted, to take one's social environment in which one has been brought up for granted. And this is, he meant, the inability to show appreciation for the larger whole of which you belong, other people, because with lack of gratitude and appreciation cuts you off from other people. from society as a whole. And so he said, you know, a grateful person, a refined grateful, will show, you know, some appreciation for their larger whole. And he said that's a mark of gratitude. And you might say the third thing he says, we forget the chain of events, all those actions that have led to the present. He says, you know, if you think about it, every one of us have been the beneficiary of innumerable acts of kind acts, positive acts over the course of our lifetime, and we just totally ignore them. You know, you get that happened. You look back, oh yeah, that person. I'm here where I am today because of thousands of many acts of other people, and to ignore that, sort of we think of ourselves in isolation, but we're interconnected with life as a whole. And some of those were conscious acts, some were just acts of a situation, circumstantial, but nevertheless, to be indifferent to them, you cut yourself off from that stream of energy that is behind that. And so that relates to the other one. Next one you say would taking friendships for granted. He says, and Cicero, one of his quotes, he says, "What friendship can exist between ungrateful people?" He said he felt it was impossible. You can't have friendships if you're ungrateful. And you can, and even went so far as to say friendship is actually an exercise in gratefulness. And so you could say, if you want to learn to be grateful, develop friendships. So that's something. And his final one was, which was nice for him to list, I thought. He says to be, if someone who is a sign of lack of gratitude is someone who does not thank God for his blessings, refer it back to the divine source. Which is kind of nice because I don't usually think of the Romans as in a spiritual sense. They're very civic minded, but not necessarily godly minded. But yet he did, in this case, he said here. And so, I think for his case, the bigger point here was not that just gratitude made people feel good, but it inspires people to do good. It encourages reciprocity, and in the process of that, it lowers our isolation, and beneath that, it softens the ego. Yeah, it softens the ego, and that really is the big problem that we face. We lack this, or that we lack this ability to soften the ego, and the ego, anything we can do to soften those edges is going to benefit us in a spiritual way. It takes us, you could say it takes us outside of ourselves, and we see ourselves in terms of a larger context. But it does take effort. But until finally it becomes a natural expression. The saint expresses gratitude is for everything. God is in everything. There's no effort there. But we have to realize that these things can take some effort. But that's the spiritual path. Everything on the spiritual path, if we wish to grow, perfect ourselves, and takes a certain effort. It's so I remember somebody else said something to the effect that gratitude is basically, it's at the heart of it is memory. It's remembrance of those things for which we might be grateful. Just to be aware and remember where there's many factors involved in where we are right now, and to keep those in mind, and to, you might say, offer back and continually make that a sense of self-offering, and we spiritualize. And essentially you could say gratitude flowers as we spiritually rise. But like flowers, we have to cultivate them. We have to cultivate them. Sustaining relationships, being reciprocal, looking for opportunities, and getting outside of our little self. And that's an expression of that. And then I'm going to leave it at that. I'll go to the comment section here, but I wanted to finish. I found some quotes of Cicero I like. He said, and which I wanted to share. He said, 6 mistakes mankind keeps making century after century. So obviously he lived, 2,100 years ago, so he was referring back to even ancient times. He says, the six mistakes: believing that personal gain is made by crushing others, putting other people down, that we're going to gain if by at others' expense, worrying about things that cannot be changed or corrected, insisting that a thing is impossible because we cannot accomplish it, refusing to set aside trivial preferences, neglecting development and refinement of the mind, and attempting to compel others to believe and live as we do. I like those. And then a couple of quotes that he had said, "Times are bad. Children no longer obey their parents, and everybody is writing a book." He was that was that's I thought that's quite humorous. Children no longer obey their parents, and everyone is writing a book. That could apply today as much as it did 2,100 years ago. And then finally, the life given us by nature is short, but the memory of a well spent life is eternal. So anyway, keep those in mind. Anyway, I'm going to look at my chat question and answer box here. We got one. Is there a way to be grateful for people who are mostly abusive? You should be grateful to God. God, grateful. You have to find, you could say, amongst the thorns of life, you smell the roses. You have to pick and choose. There's many things in this life that are suffering. Can we be grateful for suffering? Sometimes we can. I don't think we necessarily should go look for suffering, though. And obviously, when we are suffering, we should try to ameliorate that suffering. The goal of life is to get out of suffering. So consequently, you could say, even let's say people that are abusive, if it spurs you on to do something about that, it's come to your attention, then you can be grateful for the fact that you're going to do something about it. Or you could say, there for the grace of God go I. I don't want to be that person who's the abuser is probably on some level a miserable person. Thank God I'm not like that. I don't want to be like that. I'm not going to be like that, and I'm going to take a lesson from this and not be that way. And so consequently, to the degree, remember, ethics is meant to improve our conduct. Our conduct. Now, you kind of hope it would improve somebody else's conduct too, but to some degree, you can change what you can change, but certainly our conduct, improve my conduct. So if somebody's abusive to me, it's throwing myself into a situation. What am I going to do about this? I'm not going to be like that person. Maybe that's where I start. But then, what can I do about it? What can I do, in other words, is what the issue is here. It's so gratefulness is, and this is what ethics is. It's not how we feel, it's what we do. And you in any situation, you have to analyze that situation. What am I going to do here? It's the spirituality. How do you, in the face of an abusive person, how do you put spirituality into practice? It does not mean being passive. It means action. What kind of action? That's a topic for a whole other, long discussion. So I'm going to go on to the next one. No sound. Oops. I hope that's not the case right now. But if it is, I don't know quite what to do about that. You said in management, gratitude can help. How to ensure that they recognize, because Many times they don't acknowledge even a pay raise. Ha ha. Any suggestions? Well, you know, there's a certain amount of you have to comes back to here. There's certain detachment is necessary if you're in the management side here. You can do what you can do. And interestingly, these studies, people didn't realize they were induced in a momentary state of gratitude in some way. Now, you have to remember in every study that's being done, they're talking about a statistical difference that happens. Not every person, if you have 100 employees, 10 employees, a significantly statistical result doesn't mean 100 employees are going to feel grateful, but 10 out of 100 may. And I think we have to look at life in statistical terms like this, because when we're making even progress for ourselves, to improve 10%, that's that's actually statistically significant. And then if tomorrow I improve another 10%, and next week another 10%, you see, you have to think of it in these. So these are cumulative. And the fact is, employees come in all shapes and sizes and moral stripes. Some are going to be tamasic. They have not the capacity to recognize. Some are going to be rajasic, some are going to be sattvic, and we're a mixture of all of those. And so you have to look at it. You have to take a long-term view of these things, and you have to take a macro view of these things. There's a correlation. Now, and if you have a big company, it does measure up into significance. One or two people, you can't see it so much. But if you have 100, you have 1,000, and it's true. Companies that appreciate and like their boss, like their company, feel that the company is serving them, are more likely to be serviceful to the company. Are they always going to show appreciation? No, of course not. We have to be, we have to keep our eyes open. Okay, what gratitude for your virtual. Thank you. I'm going to leave it at that. So let's come back next week. And, sometimes I get on these tangents of going in a certain direction. So who knows what we'll talk about next week. But like I always say, if you do have suggestions, you know, uh, you're always welcome to share them, and I'll be grateful for them. So thank you very much. Joy to you.